August 16, 2014, 6:12 a.m., mist crawling off Upper Cascade Lake. A couple in a silver Subaru pulls onto New York 73, just past the turnout by the steel guardrail, milepost 6.2 east of Keene Valley. They see 3 tents like pale ribs against the gravel shore. No steam from the fire ring. No footprints on the dew. Essex County Dispatch crackles. Ranger Unit 812, possible abandoned campsite, Upper Cascade pullout, MP 6.2. Then, copy en route. Who leaves a campsite at dawn without boots, without packs, without a sound? What happened to Aaron Blake, Diego Morales, and Trevor Hines between midnight and this minute? 11 years later, a voice from a garage will tilt the past. For now, the mountain holds its breath. Something watched them first. By the time the sun finds the far ridge, the mist thins to a gauze that clings to trees and hair. The tents stand zipped, their shapes collapsed inward as if the sleepers rolled out and never rolled back. A tin mug lies on its side with a coffee ring dried into the dirt. A damp hoodie hangs from a line, heavy with lake smell. The fire pit is a bed of ash, gray and polite. It isn't dramatic. It's precise. That precision is what unnerves the couple who called. They expect mess, a dropped pan, the clatter of weekend hikers. Instead, the shore looks edited. Deputies arrive first, strobes slow and measured on the shoulder of New York 73. Sheriff Earl Benton steps out with a notebook and a practiced squint. Benton is the kind of man who listens more to habit than to weather. He walks the site in narrow ovals, careful to keep his boots in the obvious places. He is thinking about ravines, about people who step past blazes because this lake makes confidence feel cheap. He is also thinking about paperwork. A ranger checks the pit for heat, peers under the bare canister, lifts the tent flaps with 2 fingers. Sleeping bags aren't inside. Neither are the packs. Names surface quickly. Aaron, 29, works in Albany writing code and prefers long, clean ridgelines. Diego, 30, teaches high school Spanish in Queens and jokes his way up switchbacks. Trevor, 28, grew up in Schenectady fixing anything with a carburetor and learned to tie a bowline before he learned to drive. They have been friends long enough that they no longer announce decisions, just drift into them. Yesterday, they hiked toward Cascade Pass after lunch. A passing angler remembers their laughter and a red bandana. A trail cam half a mile up caught a blur that could be anyone. The search kicks off politely and turns urgent by late afternoon. Forest rangers grid the obvious gullies. Volunteers sweep the shoulder of the highway down to the pullout, counting steps and flagging broken branches. A state police helicopter loops once, then twice, then banks toward a pocket of spruce where the slope cups shadow. Benton calls in coordinates, an even voice riding the static. Command, be advised, teams expanding to north side of Upper Cascade at 1/4 mile intervals. He writes the time at the top of his page, as if time will offer a contour. On the second day, rain needles the lake. On the third, fog smothers sound. Dogs catch a transient human scent on a spur that climbs toward a faded sign. Danger, abandoned shafts. The letters have peeled like birch bark. The rain turns the switchbacks glassy. Someone swears they hear a shout down in the timber and runs hard enough to bruise shins. It's only a raven throwing its voice off rock. The mountain refuses to be rushed. People begin to tell the story of the last place the trio was seen, the way we do when we fear we've already passed the answer. By day 5, the radio becomes a metronome. Unit B7 at Cascade Pass overlook. Negative on fresh sign. Advise all units, avoid undercut bank near the culvert at MP 6.0. The map pinned to the tailgate grows a rash of orange tape. Each strip announces effort and says nothing about outcome. Families come and stand at the edge of the guardrail, eyes skimming water as if a misstep could float. Aaron's sister grips a thermos until her knuckles go bloodless. Diego's mother doesn't speak for long stretches, then whispers a prayer. Trevor's father keeps asking for the practical details. Who checked the creek, who last saw the stove, whether a wrong step can erase 3 men. When the week ends, Benton folds the search back into a report. He has to choose a word, so he chooses accident. He notes the weather, the terrain, the documented injuries from past seasons. He writes that experienced hikers can mistake confidence for safety and that Cascade's bedrock invites both. He closes the file with a signature that looks heavier than it should. No evidence of foul play at this time. It is a sentence built for furniture, not grief. A sentence that allows him to sleep. The lake resumes its morning ritual. Kayakers arrive and put in. Tourists pull over for pictures of the high peaks framed in blue. The guardrail warms and hums under palms. The tents are taken down and stored with other items in the property room because someone has to put them somewhere. A hoodie dries and smells like dust instead of water. The mountain does not return what it keeps, it only returns details. The couples and cyclists and busloads disappear on their own schedules, unaware that the story has not ended, only learned to hide. 11 years thicken like rings in a trunk. Somewhere north, a man sorts boxes in a garage. Colin Delaney almost missed the call. The line lit up while he was shuffling reports from a morning traffic stop, the kind of small-town paper snow that never melts. "This is Martin Cho with Northway Estate and Auction," the voice said, polite but pitched a half step higher than casual. "We're clearing a property outside Jay. The owner's a retired ranger, Owen Talbot. I found some things. Backpacks. A camera wrapped in canvas. Names on tags. One says Aaron Blake." Delaney stood so fast his chair rolled into the wall. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded with a lake and a guardrail and a sentence he'd never liked reading. No evidence of foul play at this time. He asked for the address, copied the route, Route 9N to a right onto a road whose name he'd never noticed, and drove with the steady hum he keeps for calls that might turn into ghosts. The garage door shuddered up like an old breath. Inside, cold air held the smells of oil, damp cardboard, and sawdust. Dust motes turned in a shaft of afternoon light, and a blue heron feather lay on the concrete near a rust-flaked snowblower, as if the wild had wandered in and lost its way. Martin pointed at a waist-high stack of banker's boxes. On top, wrapped in thick canvas and cinched with twine, lay an old film camera. A corner of cloth had been rubbed smooth by a careful hand. Next to it, 3 backpacks rested like patient dogs. One had a faded strip of duct tape marked DM in green china marker. Another bore a stitched patch Aaron's sister had described to Delaney years ago over coffee too bitter to drink. The third was scuffed at the bottom seam and still dusted with grit fine as flour. "Mr. Talbot passed these to you?" Delaney asked. "Not exactly," Martin said. "Ms. Talbot passed. Mr. Talbot left years back. This garage is what he didn't take." The canvas unwound with a soft rasp. The camera's leatherette was cracked and warm in places where fingers had learned it. Inside the pouch were 3 canisters of 35mm film, each labeled in neat, blocky handwriting. Cascade, Day 1, Ridge, Night. Beneath them, a torn notebook held 3 damp-stuck pages and a list that started with coffee, stove fuel, topo map, and then broke into a diagonal line as if someone closed the book too quickly. In the next box were photocopied USGS quads annotated in blue pencil. 3 rings circled portions of the high peaks, and beside 2 were notes so plain they felt obscene. Log pit. Burial site. A third note cut off mid-stroke. "Here." Delaney took a breath that found the bottom of his ribs. His palms tingled the way they do at the edge of a roof. He asked Martin for a table and set the items down in an order that felt like respect. He photographed each piece with the department point and shoot, then with his phone, then again because ritual is just hope nailed to habit. He checked the tags, the seams, the zippers. He found a small flashlight with initials etched into the aluminum in a nervous hand, AB, and a metal flask with TH scratched over a layer of old paint, like someone couldn't decide if ownership should be loud or private. He pressed the side switch of the flashlight. It didn't flicker. Battery's gone. But the weight of it said a wrist had known that heft. He called Tim Keller, a photographer who kept a darkroom 2 towns over and believed film was how memory learned to behave. "Bring them now," Tim said, no questions about chain of custody because Tim had worked crime scenes before Delaney finished the academy. In the red light and the vinegar tang, they fed the film into reels and waited for water and chemistry to decide how much of the past still wanted to be seen. The first frames were simple and dear, Three men around a small fire, a pot blackened and proud, smiles wide with the early part of a trip when everything is promise. Then came switchbacks and lookout shots, Diego's arm thrown around Trevor, Aaron off to the side pretending not to pose and failing. The emulsion had age in it, little comets of dust, a jitter in the grain. But clarity held. Near the end of the first roll, a shadow thickened where it shouldn't have. It wasn't a tree, it had joint and angle. In another frame, a hand smeared across the corner as if someone reached to push the camera down or pull it away. The last image, the one labeled night, was everything and nothing at once. A man-shaped blur at the edge of the firelight, a shoulder, the pale moon of a forehead turned almost toward the lens before motion dissolved him into weather. Tim exhaled a sound too flat to be a word. Delaney tried not to assign a name to the blur. Naming is a kind of trespass. He packed the negatives with care, noted the time against his notes, and returned to the garage to bag the maps and the notebook. In the doorway he paused. A strip of blue pencil had transferred faintly onto a piece of duct tape stuck to the lid of a box, the way soft pigment ghosts to whatever rests against it. He looked back to the quads. The blue was the same. Talbot had pressed these maps, folded and refolded them, circled and thought. Delaney felt the shape of a plan, not an accident. He closed the camera bag, signed the inventory, and thanked Martin, who nodded like a man who'd decided not to ask for the rest. He drove home the long way, past the turnout where the guardrail shines, past the milepost that made his heart a metronome for a week 11 summers ago. The facts were cool in his trunk. The feeling was not. On his porch, he sat with the notebook and the film envelopes and the maps, and he made himself a quiet promise that had nothing to do with press conferences. If the mountain had kept its breath for 11 years, he would learn how to listen to it exhale. He dialed Owen Talbot's number and let it ring. On the fourth ring, someone picked up and did not speak. Colin Delaney drove north with the maps on the passenger seat, the blue pencil marks vibrating at every bump like a pulse he could almost hear. Route 73 cut through the trees in long, disciplined lines, then surrendered to smaller roads that folded into farms and low hills. Owen Talbot lived in a squat, clean house with a porch too tidy to belong to a man who left anything unfinished. The flag moved once and went still. The door opened on the second knock, and there he was, older than the personnel file, thinner in the face, the outdoors burned into his skin the way smoke settles into rafters. Talbot clocked the badge, then the messenger bag, then Delaney's eyes. He stepped aside without being asked, a gesture that felt like a man setting down a tool because the handle had finally grown too hot. Inside, the place was neat to the point of apology. A framed topo map of the high peaks hung over a small desk. On the desk, a pencil cup, a notepad, a loop of paracord, and a magnifier on a weighted base. It was the kind of arrangement a life makes when it wants control back and can only find it in inches. Delaney sat where he could see the hallway, the back door, and the map all at once. He switched on his pocket recorder and set it on the table openly. Talbot's eyes flicked to it, then away. "I got a call," Delaney said, "from an auction house. They found 3 backpacks and a camera in your old garage. Items belonging to Aaron Blake, Diego Morales, and Trevor Hines." Talbot's throat worked. "My wife's garage," he said. "Ex-wife. Those packs were collected 11 years ago," Delaney continued, keeping his tone level, a surface just smooth enough to test where it might break. "You worked the search. You logged hours on that lake. Why didn't those items reach evidence?" Talbot's hands found the paracord loop and rolled it between his fingers. "I planned to bring them in. Then it got complicated." He met Delaney's gaze for the first time. "You know how quickly a mistake becomes a career. I thought I'd wait until..." He stopped, as if the sentence had wandered somewhere he didn't intend to follow. Delaney pulled a photocopy of one USCS quad from the bag, folded so the blue pencil circles stared up like eyes. "You circled 3 areas. You wrote log pit and burial site. You started to write something else. Garage? Gravel pit? Gray, what?" "That map could be anyone's," Talbot said too fast. "Blue pencil transfers onto duct tape," Delaney replied, letting the fact lie on the table like a knife with no one's hand on it. There was a piece stuck to a box lid with a faint blue smear that matches your circles. You pressed those maps hard. You folded them the same way over and over. That's habit. Talbot looked past Delaney to the topo on the wall, as if the printed contours might hide a human one. Old men talk, he said after a long moment. Folk tales. Before the park had rules, there were pits and shafts where people hid what they couldn't carry farther. You hear enough of that, you start marking possibilities. It doesn't make it true. It makes them yours. Delaney lowered his voice. Owen, someone wrote burial site next to a place my teams are going to walk. If it's a guess, say it. If it's more than a guess, say that. The difference matters to people who still bring candles to a guardrail. The paracord went still. I warned those boys, Talbot said. 2 days before they went missing, I saw them near a spur where the old quarry roads cross. Told them to keep to the blaze trails. They grinned like I was the weather report. I thought I was doing my job. I did do my job. His voice roughened. I patrolled that night. I saw a fire on the water. I heard shouting. It sounded like drunk and ugly, the kind that burns out on its own. Then a crack I wanted to call a branch. It wasn't. I did what I've never done. He inhaled, shallow. I drove on. Silence filled the room with a weight that chose its own chair. Delaney let it settle. And in the morning? I went back, Talbot said. Camp was empty. Packs up the slope like breadcrumbs left by a man who didn't know if he wanted to be found. Camera under spruce duff like it had grown there. I picked them up. I told myself it was to protect the investigation. Then I told myself not telling was to protect myself. He tapped the paracord. There's a word for a man who hides the truth because he doesn't like its shape. Delaney felt heat in his neck he didn't show. There's also a word for a man who stops a story before it can help anyone breathe. He slid the photocopy closer. Tell me about this third mark. Not the legend. Your mark. Talbot closed his eyes. It's a low shelf under a ledge east of the old culvert. The ground holds water there. If you step wrong, your boot disappears. If you needed to stash something for a night, you might pick it. If you needed to put an ending somewhere, you might pick it too. He opened his eyes, and they looked older than the rest of him. You'll need dogs. And luck. Delaney stood. I'll take both. At the door he paused. If I find something, it will change what your silence means. Talbot's hand drifted back to the paracord, an old habit finding home. Sheriff, he said, voice soft. After the shot, I wasn't the only one who left. Somewhere, a careful map had miscounted how many arrows it needed. They assembled before dawn at the pullout, a short line of trucks angled toward the lake like animals crouched to drink. Delaney spread the annotated quads across the tailgate, weighed their corners with a radio, a water bottle, a glove. The blue circles Owen Talbot had admitted were guesses with teeth, stared back, calibrated and quiet. Forest rangers checked harnesses and batteries. Volunteers signed waivers with the shaky focus of people who want to help and fear wanting it too much. A drone tech named Sloan lifted her case and spoke in the smooth voice of a person who has learned to keep her hands steady for others. Heat signatures wouldn't do much on a cool morning, she said, but top-down eyes can still read the ground's grammar. They hiked to the first circle, a lopsided clearing tucked behind balsam and paper birch, where old beer cans and the torn mouth of a grocery sack argued for a party that had ended before it began. The ash from past fires stained the dirt like erased letters. Delaney paced the edges and felt nothing gather. He had learned to trust the prickle that comes when a place remembers. Here, the air held only a dull rehearsal of human noise, not the shock of erasure. They logged it anyway, because even absence needs a box to live in. The second circle rose beyond a stand of spruce, where the hill dipped and darkened and the drone's live feed turned the moss into velvet. Sloan hovered the quadcopter above a seam in the ground that didn't belong. Up close, the seam was a mouth, an old shaft beaten closed by weather and time, its throat clogged with collapse. The sign that once warned of it lay face down, its corners sunk deep like a thumbnail into cake. 9 units were led in until the lip grew mean. The shepherd's ears pricked and turned, then fixed toward the cool, breathless hole. A low whine, unasked for. Delaney wrote the time and the coordinates. He felt the urge to put a hand on the dog's head and didn't, because comfort that can't follow you into the dark is a kind of lie. They moved to the third mark, the one Talbot had described with the smallest words and the heaviest eyes. A shelf hid under a glacial ledge that funneled water and shadow. The mud there was black as motor oil, slick enough that two people went to their knees and came up cursed and laughing, which made the quiet afterward hang even heavier. A wind tugged at the needles and let them fall back, revealing a stripe of fabric caught under a fallen limb. It wasn't random trash. The weave, the cording, the color near identical to the tent brand Aaron had favored. The piece had a clean edge, like it had been cut, not torn. A ranger knelt and freed it while another stood guard over nothing visible, as if holding a line against a past that might lunge. Delaney didn't speak. He watched the way his team began to move slower, the way their jokes stopped seeking footholds. In a spruce 5 steps upslope, someone found rope. A length of dynamic climbing line fuzzed from where and sheared to a flat crescent where a blade had ended it. He could feel the moment the discovery changed from a curiosity to a sentence. You don't cut rope unless you need something to fall or someone to stay. He bagged the line himself, cheeks cold, chest hot, and took in the shape of the clearing as if it were trying to admit what it had done. At the edge of the shelf, water pooled in an oval that pretended to be shallow. A volunteer from a local rescue dive group had brought a compact sonar, a puck with a mind of its own and just enough battery to whistle once across the skin. The return showed nothing with corners, nothing big enough to tell a story, only a scatter that could have been branches. They raised the puck and a zipper tab came with it, a small tooth bright as a fish scale. Someone made a sound they didn't mean to, and then no one spoke for several minutes, because reverence wears many uniforms. Back at the vehicles, the map looked smaller. Delaney drew an X over the first site, a box around the second, a circle around the third inside the circle Talbot had drawn, as if questions could be contained by a draftsperson's neatness. He called the district attorney, reported items consistent with the missing party's gear, and indicators of human alteration, language that made rough edges polite. He hated that the words didn't carry the cold that had climbed his wrists when the rope came free. He called Aaron's sister, left a message that said only that they were working leads and would keep her updated. He sat with the radio and listened to its small weather, the way urgency flattens to static when it can't find a mouth. The team broke into smaller units to begin a slow spiral search from the shelf outward. Sun came and went. A shadow that had looked like an answer turned out to be a log. A tight knot of crows performed an argument in the treetops and scattered as if denying they were ever together. By late afternoon, the shepherd returned to the shaft and lay down, nose forward, as if pledging to outweight stone. Delaney walked back to the ledge alone and studied the mud for the last honest thing it would give him. He remembered Talbot's voice when it tripped over the word ending. When he looked up, he realized they had never asked the obvious question. Who knew the shelf well enough to choose it in the dark? Delaney brought Owen Talbot in on a gray morning that smelled like wet rope and coffee old enough to argue back. The interview room at the sheriff's office wasn't theatrical. 2 chairs, a table, a clock that clicked too loud, but the ordinary has a way of making truth feel cornered. Talbot sat with his elbows near his ribs, hands flat, the posture of a man who knows where his body ends and his guilt begins. Delaney set the recorder down between them, not as threat, not as comfort, but as a witness that wouldn't forget. He started with the shelf, with the cut rope, with the strip of tent fabric that looked like a sentence someone had tried to erase. Talbot didn't look surprised. He looked relieved, which was worse. "You said you heard shouting," Delaney said. "You said you heard a crack you wanted to call a branch." Talbot's mouth worked once, twice. "There was another man," he said finally. "Not one of the 3. He came out of the dark like it belonged to him. I heard the kind of talk men use when they think the trees don't record it. So, then the crack." He touched his chest where the sound seemed to live. "I left. I told myself I had no backup, that intervening in the dark with a gun in the mix made 2 scenes instead of 1. I told myself a lot of things. None of them hold now." Delaney let the quiet stretch until it drew shape. "Who was he?" "I didn't know his name," Talbot said. "I'd seen him before. Out of season. Heavy boots when no one needed them. He moved like he had permission from the ground. The kind of man who cuts his own trails. Delaney kept his face still. He had a drawer full of men who fit that shape. He slid a photo from the film packet across the table, the one with a smear of hand across a corner and the suggestion of a shoulder at the edge of flame. Is that him? Talbot's eyes flinched as if at a flash that had come late. I think so, he said, and the verb did heavy labor. They broke for 15 minutes, so no one could say anyone was hungry or tired or tricked. When they returned, Delaney laid out what they'd found since the shelf. Raymond Pruitt's account of a beam of light thrown too hard against spruce at 1:20 a.m., Mr. Carter's sighting of a ranger truck creeping the lakeshore at a time that made the hair on Delaney's forearms lift. He told Talbot about the shepherd's low whine at the sealed shaft, about the zipper tab that rose like a tiny fish from black water. Talbot's face didn't move, but his hands opened as if something had just flown from them, and he understood, at last, that it wouldn't return. In the afternoon, they followed one of the blue pencil arrows to a depression 2 ridgelines from the ledge, a place both exposed and hidden, like a secret left in a front pocket. The ground there had a false crust. Under it, a frame of old wood sagged inward. When the light found the bottom, Delaney saw denim sunken into silt, the color the river keeps when it wants to pretend it's sky. A patch on the back pocket was stitched crooked, the way Trevor Hines had done everything he didn't bother to measure. 5 yards away, half swallowed by duff, lay a spent casing shining like a tooth. The evidence tech's breath made a small cloud that seemed too delicate for what lay between them and the earth. Delaney thought of Trevor's father, the way the man had asked for practical details to keep from asking for the one that would break him. He thought of Diego's mother pressing a rosary so hard into her palm it left an architecture, and of Aaron's sister, who had practiced writing his name smaller and smaller on envelopes as if shrinking it would hurt less. He bagged the casing and the denim and radioed the district attorney with the clean phrases that made facts palatable. Item consistent with identified clothing, ballistic component located, site secured. He loathed the way language can be made to stand between a family and their own breath. Back at the office, he told Talbot what they'd found and watched something fail in the older man without spectacle. It wasn't collapse, it was a surrender to arithmetic. I thought if I buried the parts one touched, Talbot said, maybe the sum would change. He rubbed a thumb along a callus that would never smooth. There was a time to step in, and I let it pass me like a truck at night. There's still a time to tell me where the man came from, Delaney said, careful on every syllable. You didn't conjure him. You recognized his way of walking. Talbot stared at the recorder as if it might teach him how to speak. People snare along the old corridors, he said. Trappers without licenses, men who think the woods is theirs because they can outlast the weather. Ask the bait shop in Keene about folks who don't write their last names. Ask the salvage yard out on 9N who buys rope by the spool and pays in cash. He lifted his eyes and let them land. And ask yourself who knew I'd be too proud to call for help. The clock clicked once, loud as a knock. Then Delaney asked the question he'd held back since the shaft, a question that would not leave him alone. The shaft answered first. On the third day of dogs and rope lines, the shepherd stopped pretending patience and began to bark into the dark like a metronome with a conscience. A handler eased forward until the air grew metallic and old. Delaney marked the lip with flagging and called in a small team from mines and geology. No one pretended they were going to excavate 10 meters of collapse with a prayer and a shovel. They brought a camera on a cable and the kind of stubborn that keeps people in hard jobs. The lens slid past broken cribbing and slabs the size of tables. In the wash of the lamp, something flashed and winked out. They tried again, slower. A shape turned and caught. It was just leather, worn to the color of the shaft itself. The camera nudged closer. A wallet lay in the gravel like a turtle with its shell flipped. Inside, laminated and undramatic, a card with a photo of Diego Morales smiled all the way back to the surface. They could not bring the shaft up. They brought the truth up instead, a piece at a time. 10 feet back, the camera found a pocket knife flattened to the thickness of a story told too many times and a ring of old keys that belonged to nothing anyone could name. The district attorney stood at the rim and blew out a breath that turned white. The decision came down the way weather does, slow to declare, then sudden. the file changed color in the system. Missing became presumed homicide. It was the right thing and not enough. Delaney filed the request for heavy equipment and knew it would die in a winter budget hearing, the way hard answers often do. He walked the route from the guardrail to the water as if distance could teach him another ending. At the pullout, he met the families, one by one, on a day that refused drama and gave them wind instead. Erin's sister wore the same jacket she'd worn the week of the search because some rituals only work if you repeat them. Diego's mother held the wallet and did not open it. Trevor's father read the press release aloud like he was negotiating with it. Delaney said the things he could say and refused the sentences that started with "at least." He told them about the shelf and the rope and the denim and the shaft, and he said, "We don't stop here." They nodded because grief is a contract you sign with the future. The media had their hour. Then the county had its quiet. Delaney wrote the referral that took Owen Talbot out of the gray and into the ledger. He did not charge a man with murder he could not prove. He did file concealment of evidence and official misconduct, the kind of charges that say you chose yourself when you owed the public better. The plea grew out of a room with no windows. Talbot would cooperate fully. He would tell, without embroidery or omission, what he had seen and what he had hidden. In exchange, jail would not become the place where his life ended. His pension would be stripped. His badge would not be backfilled by nostalgia. When it was over, he walked to the lake alone and stood until the wind took the heat from his face. In spring, new signs went up at the trailheads. Danger. Abandoned shafts was no longer a whisper half-peeled from wood. It was a plain sentence with a fresh bolt and a map. The county ran a safety night in the school gym, rows of folding chairs and a table of carabiners and lines. Tim Keller set up a display of the developed frames and spoke about how film remembers and how it forgets. Sloan showed the drone footage, the way the shelf hunkers until you learn its name. Parents asked if their kids could still summit. Rangers said yes, with partners, with light, with humility. A candlelight vigil curled along the guardrail at dusk, as if the road itself had decided to watch. Crows rode the thermals in black scribbles above the pass. The shepherd who had found the shaft lay with her head on her handler's boot like work and rest were the same verb with two tenses. Delaney kept working the men with heavy boots and light names. The bait shop in Keene gave him a few, each the kind of rumor that grows moss. The salvage yard clerk remembered a customer who bought rope by the spool and never haggled. None of it stacked high enough to climb. He learned, with an ache that was less dramatic than useful, that some true things refused to stand on one pair of shoulders. In the end, the report read like a map with the legend torn away. It named what could be named and told the rest it would not be forgotten even if it could not be proven. He boxed the evidence with care and wrote a letter to each family, not with closure, but with the honesty that people deserve when their lives have been edited by someone else's choice. On the anniversary, he drove alone down New York, 73 at first light and pulled in at milepost 6.2. He sat on the guardrail and watched mist lift off Upper Cascade like steam off a wound that would not close but had decided not to fester. He thought of three friends who trusted each other enough to stop announcing their decisions. He thought of a ranger who mistook silence for safety and learned, too late, that they are seldom the same thing. He thought of a stranger who still had a name the law could not catch. He let the cold hit his teeth and stayed until the sun wrote new lines on the water. The lesson, if there is one, is plain and paid for. Mountains don't murder, people do. Silence is a choice with victims. When duty whispers, answer now, not after. Tell the truth the first time, to the person who needs it most. And if you can't carry justice, carry the light.